We are live.
Oh, hello.
Hi. I'm just refreshing, letting things catch up.
Hello to everyone. Be with you in 1 second.
Okay. All set. Got it. Hey, everyone. First time, not too bad for the first time. Ryan.
Hello. So, welcome to the kind of pilot run of the first board game club that we're doing here. I'm Brian. Yep.
And I'm Erin. Sorry, lag in chat and everything, so I'm super distracted, but it's okay. Are you gonna get started?
Yeah. Good enough,
Just a
right?
thought.
You able to hear me okay, everyone out there? Okay, yeah, definitely getting some lag there, but
I think we should just go ahead because if they are lagging without a problem, then it doesn't really matter if they are on like a 10-second delay.
sure.
Oh, now that the cat's out of the room, I can close the door, which might help with the feedback.
So while she's taking care of our furry felines, we are here to talk about viticulture. Viticulture is a 2012 game that was on.
I'm right here. What's wrong?
A 2012 game that was on Kickstarter initially. It was the inaugural game of Stonemaier Games, designed by the namesake Jamie Stegmaier and Alan Stone. And it's a worker placement game about winemaking. This game did really, really well on Kickstarter. It was kind of an unknown at the time, and believe it or not, it launched just about 4 years ago. So it's crazy nowadays in the time period of board gaming to think that 4 years ago nobody had heard of Jamie Stegmaier or Stonemaier Games or Viticulture. So it's kind of funny how things have come along in the last 4 years. It's kind of impressive, really, when you get down to it. And so from there, I thought we could start off by kind of talking a little bit about what the game is about, what it does, and then Erin's going to kind of guide us from there.
Sure. I got that.
A little bit. So in Viticulture, you are playing as a bunch of winemakers. You each have inherited your own vineyard, and you're trying to build up your land, and you're trying to make the best wine that you can, and ultimately you're trying to get the most VP. Everybody gets a board that looks a little bit like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to have a series of workers over a number of rounds, and the rounds are separated into 4 sections, 4 seasons. And what happens is, and I'm just for reference for anybody who might be watching out there, because this is a discussion about the game, and we're kind of on the assumption that you've at least played the game at least once, even if you haven't played it in the last month or so. But I just thought for anybody who might not be super familiar with it, or you didn't get a chance to, Mm.
Well,
Just a
forgive
real,
you.
just a little bit of a refresher on what the game does. So it's separated into 4 seasons, and the first thing you do in the spring is each person is going to set their turn order, and you, depending on your turn order, is going to determine how you get to place them throughout the rest of the year. And you get to do that by the little rooster meeple. See that? And if you choose first and you get to go first, everything else gives you some kind of bonus. The neat thing about viticulture is that the board is segmented into 2 halves, a left half and a right half. The left half is your summer action. So you have a set number of workers, but they're only good for the entire year. So in the summer season, you get to take a bunch of the summer actions, which are doing stuff about playing summer cards, planting things, building things. And then you have to decide at some point how many you want to save for the right side of the board, which is the winter half. When everybody is done passing, then obviously you collect one of those summer or winter cards. We go into the winter, we do the same thing. This is harvesting, this is crushing them, this is turning them into wine, and ultimately trying to get victory points. And once everybody does, they've used all their units up, the round is over, and you rinse and repeat until somebody gets across the 20 VP threshold. So it's kind of fits the mold of a lot of worker placement games out there. You're putting your guy down, you're getting to take an action. But it has that little bit of a twist in that you have 2 different sides of the board that you don't quite have access to at the same time. So like I said, viticulture is, I would put it in kind of the heavy light or light medium type of worker placement game. It's definitely not a Lords of Waterdeep. It's got a little bit more under the hood than that, but you're not talking something that only the most invested gamers will play. So I think
Actually,
that's
this
part
is
of.
a game I think it's appealed to a lot of people who aren't really gamers. I know some of our friends, their parents have played it just because of the theme and because it is relatively simple to learn.
Yeah, and I think it has that kind of broad base appeal. So that's kind of the general overview of the game. Aaron, where do we go from here?
From here, you wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the game.
Right. So, yeah, viticulture's history. As I said, I kind of touched upon this a few minutes ago. It was a Kickstarter game. It was one of these, I guess, what you'd call a second wave of Kickstarter games. If some of the early games that really kind of got things going on Kickstarter, stuff like Alien Frontiers and the like, which had happened a couple of years before Viticulture. But Viticulture did exceedingly well in its own right, and the subsequent campaign for it, Tuscany, which is we'll talk about a little bit later, did even better than the original game because nobody had heard about viticulture at the time. Nobody knew what to expect. Over time, viticulture has broadened and changed and refined in terms of the game. And we're going to also touch upon kind of your thoughts on those version differences. But they definitely had the initial version. It's actually the version that we own is the first edition. But when they released the Tuscany expansion in 2014, I believe, or 2014 on Kickstarter, I don't think it came out till 2015, they released a second edition that matched up with Tuscany and had some rule changes, not a significant amount, but some small rule changes, tweaks, and the like. Since then, they have spun out Viticulture Essentials Edition. So one of the things that we're really curious about are, do you own, so you can tell us in the comments, do you own one of the original Viticulture games, or do you actually own one of the Viticulture Essential Editions, which came out either this year or the tail end of last year? I want to say it was earlier this year.
And
And
Eric in the chat is asking, was Stonemaier unknown before Viticulture? And Viticulture was their first game, right?
it
Or
was
their first big one,
Viticulture.
at least.
Yep, it was their inaugural game. They had it was the first one that really kind of made any sort of name for itself, and he was largely an unknown designer at that point. They're still a fairly small operation. It's mostly him and Alan, and I believe the third person whose name escapes me at the moment, and I do apologize because I do recall the name, but I can't quite remember at the moment. But yeah, every designer starts somewhere, and why not start out of the gate with something like viticulture, right? Like you can't can't really ask for something
Let's just
better than
design
that.
like a really solid game that appeals to a lot of people and is complex but not too bad. Like, let's just throw that out there first. Good
Let's
production
make
quality, great art, you know.
Yeah, let's just make it a solid game right out of the gate. Let's make it the game that you make that every subsequent game that you make is compared to. Because when Euphoria came out later, people compared it to Viticulture. When the Tuscan expansion came out, obviously you're comparing it to the base game. But even something like Scythe or Between Two Cities, which are vastly different games, are also compared to it. So it's just kind of remarkable that it had that much of an impact. And the thing was, like I said, it was a relatively unknown Kickstarter, even though it did fairly well. There was about 900 to 1,000 backers, which is pretty decent for an unknown designer, for a first-time designer. And nobody really knew what to expect. We didn't even know what to expect. We ended up getting it when it came into distribution in 2013. And it ended up very quickly being a selection for one of our indie spotlight games of 2013, because we could tell it fit that weight class and that accessibility that a lot of worker placements really have a hard time doing, right? Because you have something like Words of Waterdeep, and I'm not harping on it. It's fine for what it is. It's a gateway level worker placement game. The thing with Words of Waterdeep, though, is it's very kind of simplistic, so it doesn't necessarily keep some of the really crunchy gamers who love the like me, who really like those Nippon length and weight heavy worker placement games. Viticulture strikes that nice balance of kind of that, as Aaron said, on the lighter end of it, but definitely has depth of strategy. Even now, and we've played this. Oh, Aaron, how many times have we played this? A few dozens, right? I mean,
So a lot.
yeah.
Considering we don't tend to replay games for years and years and years, this is one that we will always pull off the shelf.
Yeah, we played this dozens of times, and I'm still seeing new things happen in the game, arguably with some of the expansion stuff thrown in at this point. But it's always fascinating to see how different people approach the game. And we've shown this off to dozens of people, and we've taught people who are very involved gamers and people who aren't very involved gamers. And almost everyone, I think the exception of like one person, came away really liking this game because it hit that sweet spot between the theme and the complexity and the length. Another nice thing about Viticulture is even, a 4-player game of Viticulture, if everyone's played before, it's only like an hour-ish, a little over an hour. With a 6-player game, you're going to go a little bit longer than that, but even still, hour and a half at the most for a 6-player game is pretty good because the game moves along pretty well. And so that's where the game has evolved into. The Essentials Edition, for those who might not have heard about the Essentials Edition, is their essentially 3rd edition of the game. And what the Essentials Edition has done is more or less they've adopted the first 3 or 4 expansions out of the original Tuscany expansion and basically said, now these are actually just always part of the base game no matter what. They're no longer expansions, they are part of the game. And we'll touch upon that incorporation and evolution of the game a little bit later on. But that's kind of where Viticulture has come from. It started off really as a surprise sleeper hit, if you can believe it. If you can believe that Stonemaier and Jamie Stegmaier were a sleeper hit game, that tells you where the gaming was and where Kickstarter was just 4 years ago.
Now, Ryan, you talked a little bit about how it was played. Did you want to get into that more, or are you satisfied with that? It was next on our agenda, so I don't know.
In terms of like the gameplay, or
yeah, I mean, like I said, you did talk about that a little bit, and I know most people are saying in the chat that they have played it, so it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to rehash the rules. I mean, we're all here kind of on the assumption, right, that we have played this game at least once. We know kind of the basic rules. We don't have to look up every single rule if we don't want to. I do have the rule book if anybody wants to just read it over my shoulder.
He just like keeps it with him all the time. It's really weird.
Yeah, I actually fold it up and keep it in my wallet. I have a really big wallet. There's no money in it, so I can fit rule books.
Rule books.
Yeah.
It's charming.
So I don't know. I don't need to really go into the depths of the rules. I think we all understand the basics, and I did kind of do a brief walkthrough of what they do. So why don't we can move on from there.
That's my favorite part.
All right, so why don't you lead us off with this one?
Okay, so one of the things I love about viticulture is that every time I play, someone at the table is using a strategy that I haven't really seen before. So my favorite strategy are always the visitor cards. So the summer visitors and the winter visitors, and getting as many of them as I can. And I know for some people, those cards can be a little tricky because they are pretty swingy. Like, you can get some good ones that make the game for you, or you can get some bad ones that are pretty useless. So I like to get as many of them through my hand as possible because it ups the odds of you getting one that's really, really useful. But in order to do that, you like really have to commit to going for those cards every time and make like intuitive judgments about which one you want at any given time. Do you want a summer one or do you want to save it for winter? And I just love that kind of decision. And I love that they add a little bit of randomness to the game that might not otherwise be there. But at the same time, it's only a little bit. So I can choose to engage with that or not, depending on my mood.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about those cards. I think in a little bit because
They're
I
not
want to.
everyone's favorite.
No, and I want to come back to that because I have a love-hate relationship with the cards myself. Um, for me, for strategy, I'll be honest. One of the strategies I almost always do is these guys. These are the workers, and my strategy in this worker placement game. Don't do it with every worker placement game, but with this one particularly, I'd say the first quarter to third of my game is usually focused on getting at least one, if not two, extra workers right out of the gate. It's not I don't do it every time, but it's generally my favorite way to do it. Usually because as a general rule, especially in a worker placement game like this, more workers means more actions, means more things I can do. I'm sort of sacrificing early game bonuses from losing out on building structures earlier or getting the plants that I want planted earlier, or even getting the first couple of orders done. But I find that in the long term, that tends to work for me. So I like going the worker strategy, but I usually, like I said, I get one or two. I don't necessarily max out right away, but that's usually what I do first. And then my next thing is, for me, is I like to start trying to maximize my fields. I usually go with two fields, and I just try to get the most effectiveness of those two fields that I can, and then just start generating as much wine as I can after that. I like the
Wait,
cards.
you're supposed to make wine in this game?
Okay, so that's a good segue. I've seen this happen a few times. Now, tell Erin in the comments, tell us in the comments if you've ever played a game of viticulture where somebody has either won or come really close to winning and never made wine and never actually sold any wine. Yeah, we can actually say this. I've seen this happen twice now where somebody has actually the most recent one, which was actually just the other day, he won by selling he did like one wine order
At the very end of the game, and only because he needed to end the game because he needed to go somewhere. So he was like, "Oh, I guess I'll make wine now."
Right, because he had said he had enough stuff in his hand, the various cards in his hand, to actually end it the following round anyway. But he decided he was just going to speed it up and end it that round by making two wine things, and then ended up selling them and ended the game. And he ended up going with this no wine strategy, which is so. I don't know. On the one hand, as just somebody who loves the variety and strategy of games like this, where it does, because for a lighter game, it is like very open. I will say it's a very open ended at the beginning, and then as the game goes on, it tends to tighten and everything gets really close as everyone sort of barrels down towards those final couple of rounds and getting as many orders in as they can, and everybody sort of bottlenecks
Yeah,
near
someone
the
was
end
talking
there.
about them in the comments earlier.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, that's one of the things I really like about this game. So, on the one hand, I love the fact that, theme aside, the game allows you to do that, where you can actually go a no wine order
My
strategy.
favorite is the no wine order strategy combined with the tasting room strategy, because then you have a bunch of like tours that you're giving of this vineyard that has nothing growing in it. And I just thematically, I love that. Like, please come into this empty wine cellar. Here, look, this barrel is huge. It would hold like a lot of wine, right? I,
It's like
I
a
just love that.
it's like a nihilist wine company. Like, we don't want to make wine. It is pointless, just like life. Now it's funny. It's funny that the no wine strategy, because apparently it's happened enough at this point that in the Essentials edition, in the third edition of the game, they have made a mild rule change that you cannot use the tasting room unless you have at least one wine token in your cellar. You don't have to. You don't sell it. You don't lose it or anything. You just have to have a wine to show off in your tasting room. Which I just think it's funny that they had to. Apparently, it happened enough that the designer said, "You know what? We're going to make this mild change." So I think that was pretty, pretty funny. So yeah, definitely let us know. Like, what are some of your favorite strategies that you do with this game? I'd love to hear some of them.
People are saying workers. I mean, workers is always a good one in worker placement games, at least most of the time. I know, Ryan, you said you don't do it every time, which makes sense, but most of the time, if you're playing a worker placement game, kind of the point is to get as many workers as you can, because it opens up a lot of chances for you to kind of build on that later in the game. But it can be really tricky. I know one thing I've tried with viticulture before is not necessarily getting by with as making no wine, but trying to get by with only one field or maybe two fields, and really, really focusing on the type of wine that I make.
Right. Well, I think most people tend to only do two fields, really, when you get down to it.
In the last game, I did like 3 fields, but I also lost, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's actually something I'd really be curious about, because every game, and like I said, we've played this a few dozen times at this point, and it always seems like the vast majority of the time, most people are going to use 1 to 2 fields, right? I mean, you can do a third, but it's more about variety or just having an excess of things to plant. I haven't seen a lot of strategies that really just maximize the effectiveness of using all 3 fields. But maybe that's just the people that we've played with. It's just not a strategy that I've seen used that often. I've seen it done. I've done it myself, but it never comes across as the most efficient for me. Workers, yeah. I mean, workers are very common, like you said. Though I do love this. A number of worker placement games out there. I love worker placement. Just no surprise. There's a number of worker placement games though that you do end up getting penalized for having too many workers. So either you have to pay for them, or you have a chance of losing them, or anything like that. This is this is obviously a straight up, all upside advantage to having more workers, because the more you can do, the more you have, the more you can do. Though once everybody starts maxing out their workers, then spaces start really becoming a problem, right? Because if everybody starts competing for those harvest spaces, and everyone starts competing for the winemaking, in most of the games that we play, we always run into this problem of people taking the winter spaces for doing the winter cards. Like summer, you can usually find your way in there now and then, but winter, everyone's always fighting over it in most of the games that I've played.
Except for the first round, because the first round, everyone always forgets that they have to save workers for winter. And then if you're the one player who remembers that every time you start, then you have a really great first round, but everyone else forgets. And then the second round, they save a ton of workers for winter, and it's just downhill from there.
Yeah, the last game I played, I actually had too many. A couple of rounds, I'd saved too many for winter, and I ended up having wasted workers. It was unfortunate. Now, here's one. Has anybody seen this? Has anybody ever done the grape strategy? Now, this isn't one that I've seen too often. It's basically where you don't actually turn them into wine, but what you're trying to do is you make as much grapes as you can, and you age them, and then you're selling them off using the sell action in the summer, and you're just kind of milking that like 1 VP constantly.
And it
It's not
can
necessarily
really
like
really work if everyone else is banking on like making a lot of higher level wine and they're not catching up to you, and all of a sudden you're at a point where you're ending the game because you've maxed out your VP and they haven't even really made more than one or filled more than one order.
Yeah, it's kind of it's not the grape, I call it the grape strategy, but it's basically you're nickel and diming those one VP here, one VP there, that sort of thing. So, playing with the structures and playing with selling the grapes and really basically, again, going back to that idea of not selling or making wine. And I always find that like thematically a bit of a disconnect, but again, I'm fascinated by the possibilities that you can do that in this game. I can't be alone in that.
Sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat. Ooh. So yeah.
That's right. I'm just considering. Okay. I'm just gonna play with my meeples.
Okay. People are saying like filtering through the different purple cards until they get something that matches what they are already able to do, and I think that's a good strategy, and that's not something that I tend to ever do because I get really hung up on like, ooh, I want to fulfill this order, and then I plant a bunch of fields to fill that order, and then it's like 3 turns later and I haven't done anything. One that didn't work was trying to build up to complex wines, but he said it led to like an unfocused strategy, which I can also see because if you spend a lot of time trying to just get that wine, like you're not doing like one thing really well. You're kind of doing a whole bunch of different things, maybe not as well. I think it can work, but I haven't seen it work very well as like your primary strategy. I've seen that work really well if your primary thing is like doing the visitor cards or getting all of the workers, and then when you're not doing that, you're building up to the complex wines. Especially if you can get one of those cards or something that lets you upgrade your wine cellar really, really easily, or cheaply is not a word. Cheap, do it for
Cheap,
not much money.
Cheap.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Can you get chickens?
No, there's no chickens on.
I mean, I just thought I'd ask. There's a rooster.
There is. There's this rooster, right? This one, right? But that's
Anyway.
the only one you get. Anyway, so yeah, the sparkling wines are definitely hard to pull off. There's a lot of
Amber's saying she did do the grape strategy and it went well.
Yeah, if nobody else does it, then it works. But it's a long-term commitment. You're nickel and diming your way to victory, and it's always very interesting to see that happen. The Chardonnay, the sparkling white wine. I'm not going to call it champagne. The sparkling wine is definitely a long con strategy. You have to get multiple grapes, you have to combine them, you have to have the large cellar, and you have to get the right orders to do that. That's why they're always so, like, the payoff is so good, because they're always like 5-6 VP. You do 4 orders of those and the game is over.
It just takes you forever to get there.
It just takes you forever to get there. So I've had games where you leapfrog, where I don't do a lot of the sparklings, but I do tend to like the orders with the blushes, and because they're easier to pull off, because usually you need one less grape to do it. They're more mid-range. You don't always need the large cellar, and you can get not maybe 5 or 6, but consistently 3 or 4 out of those kinds. So I like doing those, and I mean, if you get an engine going with that, I've played games where I'm doing at least one of those around. And you start out, but it takes a while to get there. So I've had games where.
Yeah, Viticulture I've found is definitely a game where it starts off really, really slow, and then all of a sudden it ends in 2 turns, and everyone's within like 3 VP.
Right, because each of those orders getting turned in, there's 4, 5, 6 points at a time, and you can easily go from 3 or 4 VP to like 15 in like 2 rounds if you do it right. Mm-hmm. Which again is something as I also like, because you can do that nickel and dime, the grape approach or the structure approach, whatever you want to call it. But you can also just do what you're supposed to do, which is make wine, and making wine takes time. So
I again, get it now.
Right? Which actually does kind of tail into like the one. Well, we'll come back to theme in a little bit because that's always the one thing that's always bugged us about viticulture. But um, I enjoy the fact that this kind of game is not it's not super hard to learn. Yeah, like any worker placement, you have to learn the basics of what all the actions do, but it flows very easily, and once people get a handle of it, they
I
really enjoy
should
it.
have found a noise to play every time you make an intentional or unintentional wine pun. Missed
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. I don't know why. That was all you.
It's not too late.
uh,
Actually, I'm wearing headphones. It kind of is too late.
want a cork?
Oh, that's actually the noise I was thinking of. Oh, like
Like a,
champagne
like a
bottle uncorking. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's lots of different strategies to the game, and I'm not one of those people. I'm not as much as I love strategy. I'm a tactician in my heart. I love long term and complex strategy and stuff. But I found that I'm not a min maxer. I'm not somebody that is going to sit there and they're going to look at the exact strategy that you need to do in order to win, and this is your turn one. So anybody who's ever played Puerto Rico with somebody who has read the extensive and lengthy, you know, like detailed breakdowns of, hey, if you take this action and this action and this action and this action in this order, within the first 20 minutes of the game, you have like an 80% probability of winning, like that sort of thing. I don't do those. I don't read those. I don't find them enjoyable, and I don't find playing with those kind of people enjoyable because min maxers are kind of annoying because they're sort of just looking at a rote, gameplay thing and less about the fun and the experience of playing with people. It's not a knock on trying to win. It's just that's not what I like out of it.
Well, I
That's
think
more
that's
of a
one of the things I like about the visitor cards too, is that they can they throw something else into the mix, so you can't necessarily purely min max the game.
yeah, because it does throw an element of luck into it. Um, but those cards, ugh,
Oh yeah, you want to talk about those cards now and how apparently people like hate them, even though they're one of my favorite things about the game.
oh, the cards, the cards. Okay, so maybe some people will back you up. Maybe people will back me up. I don't know. We'll find out, right? Tell us what your thoughts on these cards are. When we're talking about the cards, though, we're going to focus primarily for the moment on the first and second edition base viticulture cards. So if you have the Essentials edition, you have a different set of summer and winter cards than us from first and second edition. So I'm going to focus on the first and second edition ones for now because we'll touch upon Tuscany in a little bit. But oh man, the one thing that bugs me about viticulture, as much as I enjoy it, is how much the right cards that you get can swing a game for you, and how not getting the right cards can really hurt you. I'm fine with luck of the draw, like not getting. It might take a couple turns to get a wine order that you might want, or getting a plant that you might wear. I don't mind those. It's the effectiveness of the summer and winter cards, particularly because with the way they were originally designed, some of them were designed to be more useful earlier in the game. Some are designed more for later in the game. So you could have an awesome summer card that'll help you plant things, or an awesome winter card that'll allow you to turn in wine orders or get more workers. But what happens if you already have all of your workers and you get a winter card that says, hey, you get to make a new worker? Or you get a summer card and you're on like round 10 about planting, and you get these kind of dead cards in your hand that you can't do anything. You just took an action to get a card, and now you can't use it. And so you go back and you do it again and you get another one. And so it's obviously luck of the draw, but it can, I guess it's you have the luck of the draw on the one hand, and I'm willing to sort of look the other way on that because I think that's just inherent and it affects everybody equally. It's the fact that there's a swing factor that happens because of that luck of the draw, right? That if it's like luck of the draw for me is you're going to draw a card that you don't know what's coming, but you still may be able to make some use out of it. You can draw cards in this game that just are completely useless, at least through the second edition. And that always bugs me because if somebody else has the opposite approach and they get like 3 cards, but they're all really awesome, they can easily like take the lead or get really back into the game. Or, I love that there's a catch-up effect, but if you're trying to do something and you're spending that effort and that energy to get at the cards, and then you don't have any after like 3 new cards or 4 new cards to be useful, it feels like a setback almost.
I mean, I see your point, but also I approach the visitors as either my main strategy or just something to do if I have extra workers and nothing really valuable. So if I'm doing it as my main strategy, then I'm going to those places every turn, and you're cycling through cards quick enough that it's not really a huge problem. Okay, you have a couple cards in your hand that aren't super useful, but there are also usually some cards that say discard X number of cards and get whatever for however many cards you discard. And so, well, you trash those. Or you have ones where you just get rid of it at the end of the turn. I mean, if I'm playing it as my main strategy, you just have to accept that, yeah, it's a little swingy and some turns are not going to be great. You have to have something secondary built in. But I think if I'm playing it as my secondary, I think it needs to be like, you can't go like half in on the visitor cards, in my opinion, because that's when you run into cases like, Ryan, what you were describing, where you just end up with dead cards in your hand that you can't do anything with. If you do it every now and then just because you don't have anything more valuable to do, then that's fine. If you end up with a dead card, then you weren't really doing anything with that worker anyway, so no huge loss. It's a gamble. And you kind of just have to accept that. And if another player is doing really, really well with making those gambles, then I don't really know what to say. Like, double down on your strategy or try to get in on that. I feel like that kind of thing can happen in a lot of different games. So ultimately,
Yeah. Well, okay. If you go that strategy, do you always get the cottage then? The one that allows you to
yeah,
draw
someone
an extra
asked me
card?
that in chat, and I said, when I remember. I usually forget to get the cottage.
How do you do? All right. So if your focus is to get the cards, how do you not get the cottage?
By not paying attention to that.
Oh, this is what I deal with, people.
I mean, if I'm really focused and we're playing and it's not like 9 o'clock at night, then yeah, I'm probably going to get the cottage. But sometimes I forget. And I mean, that's a whole other discussion on how I play games versus how you play games. But yeah, I try to when I remember. But when he asked me that in chat, I was like, oh, I should have done that the other day.
It's yeah, it's pretty true.
In chat, Eric is saying you can still get dead cards in Essential, but it sounds like it's less often. So can you explain how the cards differ from like how you know what I'm asking, right?
Yeah. So I think I was gonna touch upon this later, but we'll do it now. It's fine. There's no real order to this. So in what happens with Essentials? So when second edition came out, they tweaked a handful of cards. So if you got the Tuscany expansion, you got a handful of tweaked cards, that stuff that might have been underpowered or overpowered, that sort of thing. In Tuscany, there was two expansions. One of the expansions is what they call the Advanced Visitors, and one are called the New Visitors. The Advanced Visitors were basically upgraded versions, like super versions of the original cards, the cards in the base Viticulture game. So, it'll be like the handyman or whatever it is, the guy that says, hey, build a structure for like 3 less, right? That's in the base game. The advanced version, so you have the advanced builder, whatever the advanced handyman or whatever it is, he now has two options for you to choose from. So it could be, oh, build it for 3 less, or draw a summer card, or something like that. And what these advanced visitor cards allow you to do is it gives you two options, and you choose which one you want to do when you play it. So it gives you a lot more diversity of option, and it allows you to avoid those dead draw cards in the base game. So they're very, very useful in that sense, because while you're not going to like they said in chat, not everything is going to be usable at any given time, but your odds are significantly improved, usually because they're going to give you something that may tailor to your strategy and something that may not. So something that originally would not be useful to you at all is all of a sudden at least marginally useful. Are you raising your hand for real?
Yeah. It
Okay.
worked. We should clarify, because we said earlier that you place a worker to draw a card, and that's not true. You place the worker to play the card. You draw it in between rounds or at the beginning of the round if you place your...
Right. It's the vineyard cards and the wine cards.
Yeah. So I was getting those confused, but the premise still kind of stands where they take up a lot of space in your hand, and your hand is relatively limited at 7 cards. So people run into an issue where their hand is like full of things, and then they can't place a worker to play a card. And that's what I hit during the last game, because there were a couple people going with the same strategy of playing a lot of the summer and winter visitors. And so everyone was putting their worker on those places, and you just get locked out.
Right, and the reason for that is because the fight on that goes to being able to play them, because those advanced visitor cards, and the way it works in Tuscany, in the original Tuscany, is that you either mix them together with their original versions, or, which is what I prefer, is you just actually swap out the originals with their advanced versions, and you still get about 10 cards or so that are left over, right? And then the new visitor, which is another expansion in Tuscany, these are just new cards. They hadn't been seen before. They were brand new to the Tuscany expansion, and they do different things, more variety of cards. So those are pretty useful. What the Essentials Edition, to answer the question, what Essentials Edition does is it takes all those, the base versions, the non-upgraded versions from the first and second edition, and removes those except for those 10 or so that were left behind. And so what happens is the advanced visitor cards from the Tuscany expansion are now the base visitor cards of Essentials, mixed in with the 10 or so that are left over from the base game, plus the new visitor expansion from Tuscany. So they basically stole all the really good, new visitor cards and advanced visitor cards from Tuscany and said, okay, these are the new base set for the game going forward, because they worked out so much better. They are just a vast improvement both in terms of the card quality and the card distribution. You don't feel like you have dead cards as much with these expansions as you do with some of the base game.
Although, just to be contrary, because that's what I do, I didn't love playing with the new cards the last time we played, when we kind of took out all the first edition cards and put in the new ones. I didn't love the ones that gave you that choice. It said either do this or do this, because instead of being presented with a choice, not even with a choice, instead of being presented with a bonus action that I could do if possible, I was presented with a choice of 2 bonus actions that probably I could do at least one of them, maybe 2. And it felt more like I was losing something when I chose one of those actions, whereas before it felt like I was only ever gaining something.
I know where you're coming from on that, but that also I think plays into the idea of you like to have all of your options at all times. This is a classic architect.
If you give me a thing, I want to be able to do something with it.
Right, it's an archetype thing.
Or to definitely not be able to do something with it and cycle through it.
Right, because if you can't use it, then your logical answer to that is to get rid of it. But if you're posed with 2 options for you who like to stockpile and who like to hold on to things like that, then that becomes kind of a dilemma in terms of which one to use. But for people who really enjoy just using them as strategy cards, that opens up the opportunity it opens up the dynamicism of the cards and the usefulness of those cards throughout the course of the game. That's the upside, is the cards become overall more useful throughout gameplay. The downside is, as you found out, that these cards, because they're so much more useful, you're going to have much more competition for those spaces in order to use them. So as good as the cards in the original version and the base version of Viticulture are, there are definitely times where having that hand, here's the corollary to yours. You have those times where you have these 4 cards in your hand. You're like, well, none of these are terribly useful for me. I guess I'll go do something else and let them fight over the winter spaces, the winter card spaces. I'm going to do something else during the winter. When every card you have is potentially
like
useful.
Harvest grapes or something. I don't know.
This is about, oh, right, it's about wine. I knew we were forgetting something. So yeah, so like if every card is at least potentially good, you do run into that opposite problem of everybody wants to use their cards at all time. So that also changes the strategy in its own way. So again, even though the game's evolving, the strategies are kind of evolving, and the counter strategies are evolving with it. So it's an interesting thing. But the cards overall, at least the ones in the first and second edition, I have a love-hate relationship with them. Yes, Miss Aaron.
Well, it's the best way. So now I forgot what I was gonna say.
Detention.
No, it's gone. It'll come back to me as soon as you start talking. I'm sorry.
I was gonna see how long I could go without saying anything. But we're live, so that's probably not a good idea. So that's the kind of the focus on the cards themselves. What are people saying about the cards? I mean, are they more in your camp or are they more in my camp? Unfortunately, I can't really see much of the chat window from here.
They're more in the not really talking about that, because we confused everyone with saying that you have to play a worker to pick up a card. They were asking how the game works with like AP players, and so I said that with you,
I'm right here. You can ask me.
Yeah, I just answered because you are an AP player, but I'm the player who deals with AP players, like you. So for AP,
just wait till we play 5 tribes. You're going to be so screwed.
Yes. Okay. For AP players, I think you struggle in the beginning when you have a very limited amount of workers, but your strategy to get a lot of workers as fast as you can, pretty much, is a good one for kind of limiting that AP, because you have a lot of workers before anyone else does. So you can take more actions, which in a sense it gives you more options. So you would think that would like increase the analysis paralysis, but I found that at least with you it actually does the opposite, because you have enough workers to do pretty much everything you want. So it's just a matter of what order to do them in. But now people are talking about cards.
Yeah, more minions equals more options for me to make decisions with. So
Eric thinks that the variance and amount of different possibilities keeps things interesting, but they will screw you sometimes, which is very, very true.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say I agree with them. The cards are sometimes very, very useful, and sometimes they're duds. But I'm willing to take that, because I think that it adds that element of chance and luck to the game that I feel sometimes some worker placements get so rote in terms of minimizing that they get dry. And so at least this adds a little bit of that kind of variety and element of the unknown to it. That also makes it more accessible to more casual or newer players. Because because like again, if I used Nippon earlier, like if you haven't played Nippon before, it's daunting just to have the rules explained to you. It takes a half hour just to explain what you're doing, let
Mhm.
alone like strategy. Forget that. So and there's very little luck in that. So it's much more accessible in that way.
And low player count is saying that the card variance doesn't really bother them, but they think that with the extended board, it actually helps negate many of the bad card draws through the selling space.
True, true, and yeah, I do like the extended board. That is for those who might not have the expansion material for that. The expanded board is a part of Tuscany that actually vastly
We
increases
haven't
the
played with that one yet. Well, I
not
have.
you have I've
Can
only
I
actually
explain your idea on Tuscany that I totally disagree with?
no because I've given up on that partially. So it's outdated. The extended board is a larger board. You can do more things. There's actually action spaces on all four seasons now. There's other things that get added to it, like VP, in different territories, because you're expanding just from your vineyard into kind of the region around your vineyard in terms of parts of Italy as a whole. So it's part of the original Tuscany. There's also Tuscany Essentials Edition, which is going to be the official and heretofore only expansion of Tuscany going forward, which will be out, I think, next month, actually. So,
The idea I wanted to complain about was the one that you had abandoned.
oh, which was that?
The idea that we have to play all of the Tuscany mini expansions like sort of sequentially. And so I can't just play with the ones that I want right off the bat.
Well, that's partially true, but we've moved. The next time we will play, we'll play with the board. See, how hard was that?
I mean, that took like a year, so I would say it was actually pretty hard.
Whatever. So,
Okay. Nope, go
moving
ahead.
on. No, no, that's fine. Whatever. I'll remember this.
I know.
So, what's next? What's next on our list?
I wasn't sure if you were done. Do you want to talk about the theme a little bit? Because we didn't really touch on the theme, aside to occasionally remember that this was technically a game about making wine.
Is that? Oh, yeah, that's right. This is actually an interesting thing. Viticulture is only one of a couple of games out there that do deal with wine and winemaking and stuff. The other one, which had come out not that long before Viticulture, was Vinos, which is a much more involved game. It's definitely on the heavier end of things, and they actually just did a like deluxe or revised edition of Vinos this year. And those are really the two major ones. It's Viticulture and Vinos that really encapsulate the idea of making wine and running a vineyard. And Vinos goes into much more detail on kind of the nitty gritty of those activities. I think Viticulture kind of distills it down decently enough. And it does a good job. I
That
know
was a
when
whiskey pun. It doesn't count.
cork. Um, yeah, so the idea, I think I like that this is a worker placement where the theme actually fits well with the mechanics of the game. It doesn't feel like it's just a pasted on theme. I really do think that it does a good job of involving, the light, it's obviously it not only touches upon it lightly with kind of the ins and outs of running a vineyard, obviously, but the mechanics that the game uses, the seasonal approach, having visitors, come to your vineyard and being able to plant things in the spring, in the summer, and harvest in the winter, and bottling them for selling. I feel like they did a really good job of evoking that, of actually having the essence of a game about winemaking, and without being either like too involved as to not be interesting and strategic, but not too light either that it feels abstracted.
And I know that one of the things Stonemaier wanted to do when they were first putting out Viticulture was to get it in the hands of people who wouldn't necessarily be on board for a typical board game, but would be more interested in something that was about a theme that they liked. So that it was about wine was one of the things they did. Bye. But it was one of the things that they did in order to kind of try to help sell it. So I thought that was really interesting and clever. And where did you go? Oh, are you getting the coasters? It's not weird at all. It's fine. I'm just talking to a wall. He does this a lot.
My apologies there. So this has actually come to a good thing that you mentioned. One of the things that they did with the Viticulture campaign was, like Aaron said, they were trying to aim it as kind of this more widespread audience thing. And so some of the stretch goals that they did with the game were including things that had nothing to do with the game, but definitely tailored to the winemaking aspect of it. So like in some of the stretch goals in the original game were like wine coasters and actually engraved wine glasses and that sort of thing. And so it being his first game, if you've ever read some of Stegmaier's later things about these kind of add-on things, he's speaking from experience because, like, particularly with the wine glasses, while a really neat idea, added an extra whole bunch of cost and a lot of extra logistics that really weren't worth it in the long run. But it fit, that theme of what he was trying to go for with the game, and I think that was part of what really helped sell the game initially. Now he can sell it on name recognition.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, I really enjoy the theme of this game, even though I'm not like a wine guy myself.
What did you get up to do then?
I thought I still had the coasters in the drawer.
Oh, okay.
I apparently lost I probably moved them when I was cleaning some stuff out, but for like 3 years, you can't see it. It's about 3 feet off camera, but there's a little hutch, and in one of the drawers for pretty much right after we got it, I actually took the coasters and put them in a drawer for potentially using them at some point in the future. But we now had like 6 extra sets of coasters, so I just apparently moved them. I probably put them with some of the promo stuff downstairs.
You're an adult when like everyone just starts buying you coasters.
Right? Like, I don't even know what to do with most of these. And then we go and buy our own anyway.
Well, I wanted special coasters.
I know, the Portal ones are great.
Yeah. Your sister bought those for us.
I know, they're great.
So that is looking at, let me just catch up on the chat. We're kind of talking in the chat a little bit about our favorite expansions, and low player count had said that they love the extended board, but Mamas and Papas is still the fave. And I definitely agree. Like I said, I haven't played with all of them yet. I have played once with the extended board. Obviously, we played with the different visitors. I love Mamas and Papas, though. That's the expansion that adds a little bit of variance to the beginning of the game. So you have the Mama and the Papa, and they each give, each one is unique, and you get a random combo of them, and they give you a different starting setup than every other player. So one might give you a trellis and 2 money and an extra worker or something like that, and someone else's might give them 5 money but no extra worker. And I won't play it without that expansion now.
Kat was trying to say hi.
Oh, they like that.
Yep. Yes, I think the ones that they included in Essentials I think are really useful. And we'll have some words on that on the site in the very near future. With Mamas and Papas is just pretty much an auto include now in terms of like starting setup, and Essentials Edition, it is part of the base game now, along with the property expansion, which allows you to flip the fields, and the like I said, the new visitor cards are also part of the base game now too. So I do really like the extended board, though I really have a soft spot for the structures, which are in the Tuscany expansion, as well as you have these new buildings that you can potentially build in addition to the kind of four basic ones that you have in the game here, aside from the trellis and the irrigation. So you can do some neat additional things with them. They come with their own little pieces and or not pieces, but their own little board and cards to go with it. So I find that also really fun. I also really like, and this is going way into the Tuscany stuff, but I also just really enjoy the Formaggio expansion, which is the one about making cheese. Cheese. So I don't know why.
We don't
really
actually play the game. We just sit at the table and yell cheese over and over again.
Yeah, everybody's just like a character out of Wallace and Gromit. It's all it is. But I don't know. I don't know what it is about that particular expansion. I just really enjoy it. Maybe because it does deviate without feeling like it's trying to make you do too much at once. It allows you to focus on something other than wine, which we've already talked about is something the game allows you to do. I just think that's just a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I don't think that one is available outside of the base Tuscany edition. I don't think Tuscany Essentials will have that in it, unfortunately. So unless you have Tuscany or want to spend a lot of money, I don't think that one's available anymore.
I mean, I feel like you could work something out if you looked around on BGG.
You can, but the copies of the actual Kickstarted Tuscany edition or full Tuscany one, the one that we have, are actually going for substantial amounts of money now.
Whoa.
Because what the Essentials did, the Essentials version, the Viticulture Essentials took like 3 of the expansions, and then the Tuscany Essentials took another 3, the Expended Board, the Structures, and the Special Workers, and that's the Tuscany one. So there are third tier expansions, so the Arboriculture, the Formaggio, and the Mafia expansions. Those 3, unless you have base Tuscany, you can't get them, and Stonemaier said there, and he's not reprinting them. So, unfortunately, that's just sort of the way it is. I don't really find the Mafia one that interesting anyway, but and if you had kickstarted the base Viticulture, you have Arboriculture already anyway. So it's mostly just the one I happen to mention is the one that is hard to get. Of course.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, super elitist jerk.
Right.
Right?
So I know we've lost a few people. They had to take off a little bit early. So maybe we can talk kind of quickly about the art for Viticulture, because the art for Viticulture is fantastic. And then go into a couple of the other Stonemaier games, like really briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the art is really well done. I think it's not. I think it has that subtle, kind of very,
It looks like a classic painting.
Right. It looks like one of those picturesque murals that you'd find about a Tuscan countryside if you were going to a restaurant or a gallery or something like that. This is the type of stuff that you would see. It's not overpowering. It's very subtle, but it's still kind of nice to look at. It's very visually appealing without being overbearing. It doesn't pull away from the mechanics of the game at all, and the spaces that you're looking to be putting your grapes on and your bottles of wine on and all that stuff. So it's just kind of a nice,
very calming, according to chat. I agree.
It is, and I think that's part of it is that ties in really well with the theme and that flavor of you're competing. You just want to sit there with a glass of wine and play this game. Like, it has that sort of vibe to it.
Yes. And I mean, the art was done, not entirely, but I think a lot of it was done by Beth Sobel too.
Yeah.
And
yes,
everything that she touches or probably looks at turns into something amazing and beautiful that makes me cry. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no, this is definitely Beth Sobel is an up and coming artist.
Definitely. She once did like a 1-hour study drawing that she posted on Twitter, and it was so beautiful that I was like, can I frame this? I want to look at this every day and contemplate all the different things it makes me feel. And I'm not even a huge art person. So I it's almost at the point now where if she is illustrating a game, I will buy the game.
Yeah, so Beth has done a number of things. If you like that sort of style of game, Beth has done a number of other games, including a couple of one of the other Stonemaier games, which is Between Two Cities. She did that one. She did Lanterns from Renegade and Foxtrot Games. She did Snow Tales from Renegade. Coldwater Crown, which was on Kickstarter. She's done a number of things. Again, this is just a fun part about the trivia of viticulture. As far as my understanding, that was also Beth's first major foray into board game art.
Really? I know she worked for Fantasy Flight for a little while too, I think.
As far as I know, she had done some contracting stuff with various different games, but in terms of like a full-on artist credit, it was one of the first that was just like solely her stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just, again, another nice thing that really worked out. I'm not saying the Viticulture was her first, but it's definitely one of the earliest that she did, and she's only grown in demand and interest since then. So definitely, good job on her there. But yeah, I think that it really hits that pleasant middle ground between the art as evocative but not overpowering.
Definitely.
So the other thing I wanted to
no, go ahead.
Before we start getting into the wind down on some of the other Stonemaier stuff, there is one thing I wanted to touch on because I'm curious about is where people might get stuck in this game, because I'm always fascinated by this particular one.
For me, it's usually that point where I haven't upgraded my cellar past the medium cellar level, and I need to fulfill orders and make wine and crush grapes and do all these other things, and I just don't have the money or the worker available to upgrade my cellar in time for it to be useful at like the first opportunity. I'm usually a little bit behind in that, which can set me back. It can be okay, but it can set me back right in the middle of the game. Yeah, upgrading to the large cellar. The medium one, I think, is fairly easy to get in general because there are some cards that can help you get it, and it's not as expensive, and usually it's early enough in the game that you're getting that one that it's like you don't have a ton of other things that you're trying to do. Because like we talked about, Viticulture has this huge like rocket effect where all of a sudden your engine clicks in and you are going, and then the game's over. So before that all starts, you have a lot of time to do a lot of the things that you need to do. It's upgrading that to that large cellar that always gets me.
Yeah, I could see the large cellar being one. For me, it's usually closer to like the latter third of the game, where I've usually figured out what I'm trying to do in terms of I need to do X, Y, and Z things, and I need to basically I have the grapes that I need on my vines, and then I have what I need in order to turn them in. All I need to do is go through that process of actually harvesting. And I always find, no matter what it is, I always have a habit of trying to harvest at the same time as somebody else, like the timing of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm always consistently getting locked out of that, especially the 2x harvest. I never time it right so that I take that when I absolutely need to. For some reason, in my thought process of trying to figure out my order of operations of what's the most important for me to do, I skip over the harvest and then go crushing and turning in the wine orders. And so I find myself always scrambling in the last few rounds of the game to make sure that I have harvested enough. And I fall for it more often than not, and I outthink myself. And that's generally a bottleneck that I have, but personally, more so than the game itself. I think that the large cellar is definitely one of those areas that you can definitely get bottled up with, though. Lack of workers, I think, is another one.
Bottled
If
up
you,
with.
yeah, bottled up. Oh wait, that's not the bottle. This is the bottle. I'm just having fun with these, by the way. But yeah, lack of workers, like you can get by without having all 6 of your workers. You can definitely play the game without having all 6. But if you like try to stick with just 3, the game is very difficult. Even
I
with
have tried that before, and it is difficult. It's one of those strategies that it's fun to try it, though. I mean, that is a conversation for another time, but just to kind of go into it a little bit, there are some strategies, especially in viticulture, where they are fun to try, even though you know they're probably not going to win you the game. And there are some strategies that you think could really do it. But I think the 3 worker strategy, you could win, but you go into that being like, I'm going to try this out and see what happens. You don't necessarily go into that strategy thinking that it's going to be like your go-to forever now.
right, and I find that it's doable with lower player counts a little bit easier. So if you're doing with 2 or 3, maybe even 4 players, you can sort of get away with it. But with larger player counts, it's very difficult to actually pull off. Hello,
Hi, Sprocket.
hey buddy.
Oh,
He likes what? He doesn't want to be on camera. He's very shy. Um,
clearly.
so yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely. Is there any areas where other people actually like run into, where they kind of run up against a wall of some kind?
Not that I know of. I have heard some people, oh, not harvesting. Oh my
Crushing,
gosh. Yes. I mean, I think
winemaking.
that's kind of the same thing. Mostly the winemaking, not having the right number of the certain kind of grapes in order to make the wine that they need. Or another thing I've seen a lot is having enough wine to make a really, or having the best grapes and you make a really, really great bottle of wine, but then you can't get an order card that satisfies it. So you end up having to sell this really, really high end bottle of wine to fulfill a lower end order just because you need to cycle through things. You need to make some money. So I have seen that happen and I've had that happen to me.
No, no, that's definitely a difficult one. One I haven't run into too often is not having enough space to plant. I don't. I've never really. I've only had that happen a couple of times where it's like, oh, I want to have a specific one here and I don't have the room for it. But that's not too common. I just happened to be thinking about that one because I was actually staring at the windmill, going, man, I should try the next time I play. I'm going to try the windmill approach.
Mm-hmm.
Which is you do windmill and yoke, and it's all about just planting and ripping things up and replanting them over and over again. I've done it once. It didn't go super well, but I want to try again for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just trying things out, trying
I mean,
different
we'll
things.
definitely be playing this game again.
Yeah, because it's good.
Mm-hmm.
And it is part of the Stonemaier family of games. And so, unless somebody else had any other input as to.
I think that was about it from chat, at least
Okay,
right now.
sure. So you wanted to touch upon just briefly, like what Stonemaier's done since then?
Because I think it's really interesting the way Stonemaier has evolved and developed this reputation where right now, the second they put something up on Kickstarter, it is fully funded. It's all set. Because they do have a really good reputation for delivering quality games. And I mean quality in terms of these games are fun to play and well designed. And also the components are usually really nice. And they deliver them at least reasonably on time. They're super, super transparent about their whole design and Kickstarter process. And I know that's one of the things Jamie in particular is really, really focused on is, you know, he puts out all these updates all the time about his Kickstarter projects, and he does a postmortem on every single one that he runs and says, this is what worked and this is what didn't, and this is what we're going to do in the future. And through that, he's really built his brand around Kickstarter in a way that we haven't seen other designers or publishers do.
Right, and he really embraced Kickstarter as a platform and has really developed it since then. Now the funny part about that is that he's gotten to a point of success. Stonemaier Games has that they don't need to actually release everything on Kickstarter. So they've for a number of their products, for various different expansions and upgrades and stuff like that, reprints and the like, they're actually not going the Kickstarter route. They're doing more of a pre-order route. That's not uncommon with certain other games like GMT and stuff like that. So as great as Kickstarter has been for him, he's not beholden to that being the only option as a business out there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's done really well. Viticulture was actually his breakout, and then that was followed up by the dice placement game Euphoria, which again has nice components and everything like that. Was not as is still a game that's liked, but it's not as universally loved overall as Viticulture is. It's a dice placement, dice manipulation game.
In music, it's kind of, and even books to some extent, actually a lot, it's kind of known that creator's second work is usually not as good as their first, because their first one, they've spent their entire life up until that point working on it, even if it's just in their head. Whereas their second one, they've had to put it all together in a year, and they haven't quite gotten that process down yet. After their second one, it usually becomes a little more streamlined and the quality picks up again, but sophomore slump is real.
Yeah. And that actually shows. I mean, as much as I do like Euphoria, again, the one real issue that people have at Euphoria is, again, the power level and the swinginess of the recruit cards. Some of them are way more useful than others, and they've tweaked and adjusted that in subsequent revisions and stuff like that as well. So Euphoria, but it was a dice placement, dice manipulation game, good quality, another decent Kickstarter that was done, and then they went back to the land of Viticulture when they did Tuscany, and so Tuscany was super popular. We did a preview for the campaign for that when it came out, and so I think I have some piece of the prototype somewhere. Just ended up getting left behind somehow. And that did really, really well. And then after that was Between Two Cities, which was the first game that Stonemaier put out that he didn't design himself, which is just kind of a light tile placement game. That's the one where you play with up to 7 people, and you're taking tiles and you're putting to the left and the right. It's a very simple half-hour game. Really, really useful as like a gateway or game to break into the evening or finish out the evening. Super light. Definitely lighter even than the other stuff that he had done. And then the pendulum swung the other way again when he went to Scythe, which is like his huge, probably his biggest release yet, in terms of both the size and the scope of the game, the complexity of the game.
Another one with really evocative artwork too.
The artwork of Scythe is phenomenal, and it was definitely a very hyped game. Got a lot of attention, did incredibly well, and I mean like incredibly well on Kickstarter. Did over 1 million on Kickstarter. Like that for any board game that does that, that isn't a pure minis game. That's phenomenal, and it's generally is pretty well received there. And then that's their most recent one. They have that they're currently working on is Charterstone, but in the in-between, they've done the Viticulture Essentials Edition and Tuscany Essentials Edition, and he keeps refining his magnum opus, which is his first game. And so I guess I'm really curious to hear feedback on the fact that there are now multiple revisions of this game, even for a game that's only just about 4 years old. You've now gone through multiple minor rule tweaks and essentially 3 different editions at this point.
I think that's really hard. It's hard for people to keep up and know which version they're playing and which version they should buy. And it also almost seems like at some point you kind of need to let the game stand and move on. And I like that he's still willing to put the work in to make this a really great game. But I also sometimes feel like it's okay. Like devote that energy to something else now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I who like I'm pretty invested. I still have to look things up, particularly with viticulture and the changes that have gone on to the different versions and the like. I just
It's hard.
it's hard, and all of the information is on his website, and it's very it's pretty easy to find. So I give it full marks for that. But the fact that I know to go looking for it there. The average consumer, they might not know. So for them, the Essentials edition of Viticulture is going to be the only game that they know going forward. And so in the long run, as long as there isn't more revisions in a subsequent edition, it's not the end of the world. But this is kind of something that you do see sometimes with games that, as good as they are, they get a little bit more refined and change going forward. It's obviously his product, and he can make any changes he wants to it. But it can be hard for gamers to keep up, especially in an era of gaming where there's so many new things coming out that it can be hard sometimes to get any attention for something as small as a new edition.
Totally.
So it's tough. It's good. It's got good. It's positives and negatives, because I think the additions are ostensibly always trying to make the game better, and I think in a lot of ways it is. But there is always going to be that kind of latency with people who have the older version not realizing that there have been changes, or they don't like the universal changes. The fact that there's going to be a couple of expansions in Tuscany, for example, that you cannot get unless you have one of the original Tuscany versions, one of those. Cheese. So, there's that to contend with, and I think that's all part of the nature of a game that is coming from a Kickstarter environment and coming from a small design studio. Those things they change. I mean, even bigger games over time, they will put out new editions of something, and sometimes they're radically different in terms of rules or mechanics or stuff that gets added or removed from the games, to a point where you can almost claim that they're another game in some ways. And I don't think you don't reach that, but there's definitely a lot of little things that you have to take into consideration when it comes to viticulture and figuring out what version you're playing with, because sometimes that'll matter to people.
Yes. Did you have anything else before we kind of wrap up, Ryan?
No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, I don't know what else I can say other than, it's a pretty solid game that's pretty accessible to a lot of people, and with good reason. No, it's all you. I'm not going to...
Okay. I think the only other thing that I really want to say is that there are a couple things. One, I really like viticulture. Two, if you think of something and you're watching this video like later, I am always willing to talk about viticulture. So come at me with that. Three, I like viticulture even though I don't really like wine that much. I can't drink red wine, and white wine is not that great. And Ryan doesn't drink it at all. So if you are on the fence about viticulture, but you are not sure if the theme is for you, give it a shot, because I did it. Try it, because it can be a really great game.
My best prop all night, putting a cork in it.
I'm ending this now. Thank you all so much for participating and watching, and please like and subscribe all our videos everywhere. Do all the things. We love you.
Yeah, no, thank you for...
Should we announce our next game?
Oh, I suppose we can, because this was the first of the Board Game Club, but we have another one coming next month. Date to be announced. It's going to be a little tricky because the middle of this time next month is sort of an in-between, neither period between BGG Con and Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday.
So we're going to figure out a date.
Christmas and Halloween.
It will be around this period, about a month from now. But we do have the next game for you, so get out and get ready to do some homework. Our next game is going to be another one that Aaron really enjoys, and that's Suburbia. So Suburbia is a game by Bezier Games. It's a city building game. Came out in, I want to say it's 2012, around then. It's one of Bezier's best known games, and it's all about building up a city, playing different tiles, and trying to get the biggest and most value of your city, getting the most VP, the most income, the most population, and try to make the best city that you can. So for November, for Board Game Club, Suburbia. Grab it off your shelf.
And then we can talk about it.
Yeah,
I want to talk about it because
all our awesome cities that we can make. Mine's gonna be nothing but like an industrial like wasteland. It's gonna be great. Nobody will live there, but it'll make me tons of money.
Yeah. All right, so I think we can wrap this up with Ryan's horrendous strategy. So thank you all again so much for joining us. This was a pleasure. And we will see you all next month. Bye.
Bye, guys.